Whispers of history from Northwest. Dark welcomes you tonight. You stand at the edge of a steep mountain path beneath a fading Greek sunset. Warm dust clings softly against your sandals, while distant cicadas sing through silver olive trees. Far below, waves from the Corinthian Gulf glimmer like black glass beneath the evening sky. Ahead of you waits Delphi, the sanctuary ancient rulers feared almost as much as death itself. For centuries, kings, generals, and desperate travelers climbed this sacred slope, searching for answers about wars, betrayals, and the future of entire civilizations. Some arrived proud, others arrived trembling. Many left disturbed by what they heard inside the Temple of Apollo, because the Oracle of Delphi rarely offered comfort. Instead, she whispered riddles. And those riddles had a terrible habit of coming true. Tonight you will wander through torchlit chambers, breathe the strange fumes rising beneath the temple floor, and sit beside powerful men who slowly realize destiny may already be written. Along the way, you may begin wondering something unsettling yourself. What if the ancients truly believed the future could leak into the present? And what happens when someone hears a prophecy they cannot escape? So before you settle into the story, take a second to like the video and hit subscribe. And while you're here, comment below with your location and local time. Somewhere in the world, another sleepless listener is joining you beneath the same night sky. Now dim the lights and begin walking upward toward Delphi. The mountain air grows cooler with every step. Pine needles crackle faintly beneath your feet, while thin streams slip quietly through pale stones nearby. Pilgrims surround you along the narrow road, wrapped in wool cloaks, carrying baskets of fig's oil and tiny carved offerings for Apollo. Nobody speaks very loudly here. The silence feels intentional. Even the wind seems careful. Delphi rests along the slopes of Mount Parnassus, like a place suspended outside ordinary time. Small fires flicker beside marble buildings, casting soft amber light across polished columns. Somewhere farther uphill, bronze bells chime gently in the darkness. The smell reaches you first. Burning laurel leaves, sweet resin, cold stone after sunset. Ancient Greeks believed this sanctuary marked the center of the world itself. According to legend, Zeus released two sacred eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and they crossed paths directly above Delphi. To mark the spot, priests placed a sacred stone called the Omphalos, the navel of the world. Simple words, heavy meaning. Historians generally agree Delphi became enormously influential by the 7th century BCE, attracting visitors from across the Mediterranean. Yet scholars still debate how much political power the priests truly controlled behind the scenes. Some believe the oracle merely reflected public fears. Others suspect she quietly shaped history itself. You continue climbing. At the center of the sanctuary stands the Temple of Apollo, glowing faintly beneath torchlight. Its marble columns rise from the mountainside with eerie stillness, almost blending into the pale cliffs behind them. A line of anxious visitors stretches toward the entrance. Among them, tonight, stands a king, Croesus of Lydia, one of the wealthiest rulers in the ancient world. Even now his name still echoes through old expressions about unimaginable riches. Ancient writers claimed his treasury overflowed with gold dust, silver bowls, and jewel-covered statues. Yet despite all his wealth, Croesus cannot purchase certainty. War approaches, and fear follows him uphill. You watch servants unload extravagant gifts beside the temple entrance. Golden lions, fine fabrics, ornate cups hammered from precious metals. Croesus hopes Apollo will reward generosity with clarity. That hope will not last long. Inside the temple, oil lamps flicker across dark stone walls, streaked by centuries of smoke. The chamber feels strangely warm, despite the cold mountain night outside. Priests dressed in pale robes move quietly between visitors, their footsteps barely audible against the polished floor. Then you notice something odd, a faint scent beneath the incense. Sharp, almost sweet, like crushed herbs mixed with damp earth. Modern researchers have long argued about the oracle's mysterious trance states. In the early 20th century, many scholars dismissed ancient stories about intoxicating vapors entirely. Yet later geological studies suggested natural gases may indeed have risen through cracks beneath the temple. Nobody knows for certain. But the mystery lingers. At the center of the chamber sits the Pythia, the famous oracle herself. She appears older than you expected. Not regal, not dramatic, just quiet. Her gray hair falls loosely around her shoulders, while she sits above a sacred fissure in the stone floor. Laurel leaves rest in her hands. Nearby, water drips softly, somewhere in the darkness. Croesus kneels before her. The room becomes still. Even the torches seem calmer now. The king asks the question consuming his thoughts. Should he attack the Persian Empire? For a moment, nothing happens. Then the Pythia begins to sway gently. Her breathing changes. The priests lower their eyes. And finally, the prophecy arrives. If Croesus crosses the river O, she whispers, a great empire will fall. The words drift through the chamber like cold smoke. Beautifully vague, terrifyingly precise. Croesus hears exactly what he wants to hear. He believes Persia will collapse before his armies. So he marches confidently into war and destroys his own empire instead. The prophecy becomes famous across the ancient world because it feels almost cruel in hindsight. The oracle never lied. She simply allowed human certainty to complete the trap. You can almost imagine Croesus later replaying those words endlessly inside his mind. A great empire will fall. Yes, his own. Outside the temple, the night deepens across the mountains. Wind brushes softly through cedar trees, while distant wolves call somewhere beyond the valley. Pilgrims huddle beside fires, speaking quietly about the oracle's latest visions. Some appear comforted. Others look pale. Ancient Greeks consulted Delphi before battles. Colonization efforts, political reforms, and even personal decisions. Major city-states sent representatives carrying lavish offerings, hoping Apollo might reveal favorable futures. But prophecies rarely arrived clearly. That uncertainty gave Delphi its strange power. The human mind dislikes unanswered questions, especially frightened minds. Especially, one lesser-known story claims a philosopher once mocked the oracle, publicly insisting all prophecies were manipulative nonsense designed to influence kings. According to later accounts, he suddenly abandoned the sanctuary after hearing a prediction involving his family. No surviving record explains what the prophecy actually said, which somehow makes the story creepier. You wander farther through the sanctuary, now passing sleeping travelers, wrapped beside dying embers. Moonlight washes across marble statues, worn smooth by centuries of rain and touch. The mountains surrounding Delphi loom like enormous shadows, watching silently from every direction. It becomes easier to understand why visitors believed gods lived here. The place feels removed from ordinary life, almost suspended between worlds. And perhaps that is why prophecies frightened ancient people so deeply. Not because they guaranteed disaster, but because they suggested humans possessed very little control at all. Imagine hearing your future spoken aloud by someone believed to channel divine knowledge. Would you resist it? Or would the prophecy quietly shape your choices without you noticing? Historians continue arguing whether the oracle's predictions were genuinely influential or simply interpreted, afterward through selective memory. Yet there is little doubt Delphi affected political decisions throughout ancient Greece for centuries. Words changed actions, actions changed history. And somewhere beneath the temple floor, unseen vapors continued rising through stone. The fires outside begin fading lower now. Night insects hum softly across the mountain slopes, while cold air slips gently through the sanctuary columns. Above Delphi, stars spread endlessly across the dark sky. The same stars Croesus once studied nervously before entering the temple. The same stars countless frightened travelers watched while wondering whether fate had already chosen their path. You remain there quietly beside the ancient sanctuary, listening to the wind move through the ruins, while the oracle's warning lingers softly in your thoughts. A great empire will fall, and somewhere deep inside the sleeping mountains, it almost feels as though Delphi is still whispering. Section 2. The sky above Babylon does not look natural tonight. You stand atop massive sandstone walls, while warm desert wind presses gently against your face. Far below, torchlight flickers through crowded streets where merchants close their stalls earlier than usual. Camels groan softly beside the city gates. Somewhere in the distance, dogs bark nervously toward the darkness beyond the Euphrates River. But nobody inside Babylon is truly watching the streets. All eyes are fixed upward. The moon hangs low above the horizon, dim and reddish beneath drifting clouds. Priests gather along the highest terraces of the great ziggurat, whispering anxiously, while servants carry clay tablets, bronze bowls, and burning oil lamps between them. Because tonight, the heavens are behaving strangely. And in ancient Mesopotamia, strange skies meant danger. You walk carefully across worn stone steps, climbing toward the summit temple. The city stretches endlessly around you, enormous and restless beneath the night. Babylon is one of the greatest cities on earth during this era, filled with hanging gardens, towering walls, sacred shrines, and vast libraries of cuneiform records. Yet despite all its wealth, Babylon fears the sky more than invading armies. The ancient Mesopotamians believed celestial events revealed messages from the gods themselves. Eclipses, comets, meteors, and unusual planetary movements were not random phenomena. They were warnings, divine signals, cosmic threats written across the stars. Historians know Babylonian astronomers were astonishingly advanced for their time. By carefully recording planetary movements over centuries, they developed remarkably accurate methods for predicting eclipses and tracking celestial cycles. But prediction did not reduce fear. If anything, it intensified it. Because knowing disaster approaches rarely feels comforting. The priests above you move with tense precision beneath heavy robes dyed dark blue. Their fingers are stained with ink from endless calculations pressed into clay tablets. Some carry polished obsidian tools used for observing the heavens. Others quietly recite prayers beneath their breath. The smell surrounding them is thick and earthy. Hot wax, dust, burning cedar oil, and faint river mud drifting upward from the Euphrates below. One elderly scholar points toward the moon while murmuring to another priest nearby. You follow his trembling hand. The eclipse has begun. A dark shadow slowly consumes the moon's surface, while nervous whispers ripple across the rooftop observatory. Far beneath the ziggurat, ordinary citizens begin shutting doors and extinguishing lamps inside their homes. Children are pulled indoors quickly. Animals grow restless. Even the wind feels uneasy. To Babylonian astrologers, lunar eclipses ranked among the most terrifying omens imaginable. Certain eclipses specifically warned of danger toward kings' empires or military campaigns. Ancient omen texts describe detailed interpretations, depending on the eclipse's timing, color, and position in the sky. Some predictions became oddly specific. If the eclipse begins in the west, one surviving tablet warns, "The king will face destruction." Simple sentence, terrifying implication. You move closer beside a young temple apprentice, pressing symbols carefully into wet clay. His hands shake slightly while recording the eclipse's progression. He cannot be older than 15. Yet tonight he helps document what many believe could determine the empire's fate. One fringe account from later Mesopotamian tradition claims priests occasionally installed temporary substitute kings during dangerous celestial events. The false ruler would symbolically absorb divine punishment before quietly disappearing afterward. Historians still debate whether these rituals occurred exactly as described or became exaggerated through later storytelling. Either possibility feels unsettling. Imagine briefly becoming king purely to die in someone else's place. The moon darkens further now. A deep reddish glow spreads slowly across its surface. Gasps rise softly around the temple roof. Blood moon. Ancient people across multiple civilizations feared red eclipses intensely, but Babylonian astrologers developed some of the most elaborate interpretations. Their surviving omen collections contain thousands of celestial observations tied to political and natural disasters. Many predictions connected eclipses with famine rebellion or foreign invasion, and sometimes, frighteningly enough, terrible events followed. Below the observatory, Babylon itself seems quieter than before. The usual sounds of laughter and commerce have faded beneath nervous anticipation. You hear sandals scraping across stone, distant chanting from lower temples, and the occasional nervous cry of livestock somewhere beyond the walls. The city waits, as though the sky itself might deliver judgment. A royal messenger suddenly arrives breathless beside the priests. Sweat shines across his forehead despite the cool night air. He kneels quickly before the chief astrologer and delivers news in hushed tones. Border conflicts, rumors of revolt, troop movements near Assyria. The old priest closes his eyes briefly. The eclipse now feels even worse. Ancient rulers depended heavily upon court astrologers for guidance during uncertain periods. Kings often delayed battle ceremonies or political decisions, depending upon celestial interpretations. Some leaders became almost obsessive regarding omens, consulting priests before major actions. Fear shaped policy. The stars shaped fear. And somewhere inside this cycle, empires rose and collapsed. You step toward the edge of the ziggurat and gaze outward across the sleeping desert. Cool air brushes your skin, while smoke drifts lazily upward from household fires below. The Euphrates reflects fragments of crimson moonlight, like liquid copper. Beautiful sight. Uneasy feeling. There is something uniquely haunting about ancient astronomy, because it combined extraordinary intelligence with overwhelming superstition. Babylonian scholars mapped planetary motions with stunning precision, while simultaneously believing those movements predicted human suffering. Reason and fear lived together comfortably here. Perhaps they still do. Modern people often imagine ancient civilizations as primitive or irrational. Yet standing beneath this eclipse, surrounded by scholars recording celestial patterns with mathematical discipline, the distinction feels less obvious. After all, humans still search the skies for meaning. We simply use different language now. One nervous apprentice quietly mentions a comet seen several weeks earlier, near the eastern horizon. Several priests exchange worried glances immediately. In Mesopotamian omen literature, comets frequently symbolized instability and approaching disaster, particularly for rulers. A surviving Assyrian tablet describes a blazing celestial object, bringing fire and death to the land. Another warns of pestilence spreading after unusual heavenly events. While many predictions obviously failed, the few apparent successes became unforgettable. Fear remembers coincidence very well. The eclipse slowly reaches totality. Now the moon glows fully red above Babylon. No birds sing. No voices rise from the streets below. Even the river sounds muted tonight. The chief astrologer finally speaks aloud, his voice thin but steady against the desert wind. He warns the gathered priests that difficult months lie ahead. Sacrifices must be prepared. Ritual protections must begin immediately. And the king must be warned before sunrise. Nobody questions him, because uncertainty itself holds enormous power. You watch temple servants light additional braziers along the rooftop, while smoke curls upward toward the darkened heavens. Their shadows flicker strangely against ancient stone walls, carved with lions' gods and celestial symbols. For one strange moment, the entire city feels suspended between worlds. Half science, half nightmare. Historians continue debating how sincerely Babylonian elites believed every omen they recorded. Some scholars suspect celestial interpretations occasionally served political purposes, allowing priests to influence royal decisions indirectly. Others argue genuine belief dominated nearly every aspect of Mesopotamian religious life. Either way, the fear was real, and fear changes behavior. As midnight approaches, the shadow finally begins releasing the moon. Pale silver light slowly returns across the sky, while tension eases almost imperceptibly among the gathered priests. A few exhausted apprentices sit quietly against warm stone walls, rubbing tired eyes beside stacks of clay tablets. The crisis has passed, perhaps. Yet nobody here truly believes the warning ended tonight, because omens rarely arrived alone. You begin descending the ziggurat steps, while Babylon slowly exhales beneath the fading eclipse. Doors creak open again. Distant conversations cautiously resume. Somewhere far below, a flute begins playing softly in the darkness. Life continues. For now. Behind you, the astronomer priests remain on the rooftop, watching the sky with exhausted concentration, still searching for patterns hidden among the stars, still trying to understand whether humanity can ever outrun what the heavens appear determined to announce. And above ancient Babylon, the moon shines quietly once more, as though nothing happened at all. Section 3. The evening air in Pompeii feels strangely heavy tonight. You wander along smooth stone streets still warm from the fading summer sun, while distant laughter drifts from crowded taverns nearby. Olive oil lamps glow behind open windows. Merchants sweep dust from their storefronts. Somewhere farther uphill, a fountain trickles softly beneath marble statues streaked with mineral stains. At first glance, everything appears ordinary, comfortably alive. Yet beneath your sandals, the ground trembles very slightly. Not enough to alarm most people, only enough to notice. A dog suddenly begins barking somewhere across the street. Then another answers farther away. A few citizens pause briefly before continuing their conversations. Small tremors happen often here near Mount Vesuvius. Most residents barely acknowledge them anymore. That familiarity will become deadly. You continue walking beneath balconies draped with flowering vines, while cool evening breeze carries scents of wine-baked bread, seawater, and smoke from household kitchens. Pompeii thrives during this period as a wealthy Roman resort city overlooking the Bay of Naples. People come here to relax, to trade, to gamble, to enjoy warm baths and theatrical performances. Nobody expects the mountain watching silently above them to erase the entire city within hours. Historians estimate roughly 10 to 20,000 people lived in Pompeii before the eruption of 79 CE. Excavations later revealed remarkably preserved homes, bakeries, bathhouses, and even graffiti scratched casually into walls. Fragments of ordinary life survived beneath volcanic ash, which somehow makes the disaster feel even more personal. You pass a small bakery where workers remove fresh loaves from a clay oven. The smell is rich and comforting. Flour dust floats softly through golden lamplight, while tired laborers joke quietly with one another. One of them pauses suddenly. The cups hanging nearby begin rattling faintly. Another tremor. Longer this time. Still, nobody panics. A woman mutters a quick prayer beneath her breath before returning to her meal outside the bakery. An older man shrugs dismissively and continues discussing horse races with friends seated nearby. People adapt remarkably well to warning signs, especially repeated ones. Modern volcanologists believe Vesuvius experienced numerous smaller earthquakes before the catastrophic eruption. Ancient writer Pliny the Younger later described tremors occurring frequently enough that residents considered them routine. Routine danger feels strangely invisible, and humans are experts at ignoring familiar threats. You drift farther through the city as twilight deepens overhead. Wealthy villas glow with candlelight beyond painted courtyards filled with fountains and statues. Music rises softly from private dinner gatherings. Sandaled footsteps echo against stone alleys, polished smooth by generations of traffic. Then you notice something unsettling. The birds have gone quiet. Very quiet. Only distant insects remain. A humid breeze slides uncomfortably across your skin, while the smell of sulfur faintly enters the air. Not strong enough for immediate alarm, just unpleasant enough to notice subconsciously. Above the city, Mount Vesuvius looms dark against fading stars, watching. One lesser-known Roman superstition claimed unusual animal behavior sometimes predicted divine punishment or natural catastrophe. Several later accounts from the region describe livestock growing agitated shortly before the eruption. Historians still argue whether these stories emerged afterward, through fearful embellishment, or reflected genuine observations ignored at the time. Either possibility feels eerie tonight. You approach the forum at the center of Pompeii, where citizens still gather despite the growing darkness. Vendors sell figs, fish sauce, and wine beneath hanging lanterns. A politician loudly argues about local taxes, while listeners pretend to care politely. Life continues stubbornly. Yet the atmosphere feels thinner now, more fragile somehow. Near the temple steps, you overhear two priests discussing strange omens witnessed recently around the city. One mentions underground rumbling. Another quietly references well water behaving oddly during recent weeks. They lower their voices quickly afterward. Romans interpreted natural disasters through both practical and spiritual frameworks. Earthquakes, eclipses, and volcanic activity often carried religious significance alongside physical danger. Sacrifices and rituals commonly followed unusual environmental events. Still, Vesuvius itself inspired surprisingly little fear before the eruption. Most residents simply did not recognize the mountain as volcanic. Imagine living peacefully beside something capable of destroying your world without warning. Now imagine never understanding what it truly is. A cool gust suddenly sweeps through the forum, extinguishing several lamps at once. People glance upward instinctively. You do too. A thin, dark cloud rises faintly above Vesuvius. At first, it resembles ordinary smoke. Then it grows taller and taller. Conversations begin fading around you. The strange column continues climbing into the sky, spreading outward near the top, like a massive pine tree. Pliny the Younger later described the eruption cloud in exactly those terms, after witnessing it from across the bay. Ancient eyewitness testimony rarely feels so vivid, or so helpless. The first ash begins falling quietly. Tiny gray particles drift through torchlight like soft winter snow. A child reaches outward curiously to catch them. Nearby citizens murmur uneasily, while others laugh nervously and head indoors. Nobody fully understands yet. But fear has entered the city now. You hear distant shouting from farther uphill. More tremors follow, stronger than before. Statues shake slightly atop nearby buildings, while loose stones clatter into narrow streets. A horse breaks free from its tether. People finally begin moving faster. The smell changes suddenly. Sharp sulfur, burning minerals, hot dust. Your throat tightens slightly with every breath. Ancient Romans lacked scientific explanations for volcanic eruptions, yet many immediately interpreted the event as divine anger or supernatural punishment. Temples filled quickly with frightened citizens seeking protection from gods who suddenly seemed terrifyingly active. Others simply fled. Some never escaped. You hurry beside crowds pushing toward the city gates, while ash falls thicker across rooftops and streets. The once beautiful evening now glows dim orange beneath the expanding cloud overhead. Thunder rumbles strangely from inside the eruption column itself. Volcanic lightning. Beautiful sight. Horrifying meaning. One frightened merchant stumbles beside you carrying a small wooden box filled with coins and family jewelry. Another man drags an elderly relative through the growing chaos while muttering prayers to Jupiter. Most people still believe they have time. That assumption becomes fatal. Historians estimate many Pompeii residents initially survived the early eruption phase only to perish later when deadly pyroclastic surges swept across the city during the following morning. Fast, hot, unavoidable. Yet tonight, during these first terrifying hours, uncertainty dominates everything. Should people stay indoors? Flee immediately. Wait for official guidance. Human confusion spreads almost faster than the ash itself. You glance backward one final time toward the mountain. The eruption cloud now towers impossibly high above Pompeii, illuminated from within by flashes of fire and lightning. Entire sections of the sky disappear behind swirling darkness, and still the city has not fully accepted what is happening. That may be the most haunting part. Disaster rarely announces itself clearly enough. It arrives gradually, then suddenly. As ash thickens around you, footsteps crunch heavily across streets, once filled with music and laughter only hours earlier. Roof tiles begin collapsing in distant neighborhoods beneath growing volcanic weight. Cries echo through the darkness. Yet amid the panic, strange moments of calm remain. A mother comforting her child softly. A baker helping strangers load supplies. Neighbors guiding one another through falling ash. Human kindness survives surprisingly long beside catastrophe. You finally reach the outer edge of the city and pause briefly beside an orchard overlooking the bay. The sea reflects faint red light from the eruption, while hot wind blows steadily from the mountain now. Pompeii behind you looks unreal, half visible through drifting ash, already fading. Centuries later, archaeologists would uncover bodies frozen mid-motion beneath hardened volcanic layers. Sleeping, running, praying, hiding. Ordinary people trapped inside an extraordinary ending. And above them all, Vesuvius continued roaring into the night, while the ancient world watched in terror beneath a sky filled with fire. Section 4. The snow begins falling long before the world ends. You stand beside a crackling fire inside a Norse longhouse, while icy wind rattles the timber walls outside. Smoke curls lazily upward through an opening in the roof, carrying the scent of pine resin wet wool and roasted fish into the cold northern air. Around you, weary travelers sit quietly beneath flickering torchlight, listening to an old seer describe the future. Not next year, not next century, the final future. Ragnarsk, the doom of gods and men. Beyond the wooden walls, darkness stretches across frozen fjords and black pine forests beneath a pale winter moon. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howl across the snow-covered hills. Inside the hall, nobody interrupts the storyteller, because these prophecies are older than kingdoms, older than memory itself. The old seer leans closer toward the flames, while shadows dance across his weathered face. His voice remains calm, almost gentle, as he describes the signs that will announce the end of the world. First comes Fimbul winter, a terrible winter lasting 3 endless years without summer. Snow falls constantly. Brother turns against brother. Kings betray their own blood. The world slowly forgets warmth. You listen to the fire popping softly, while cold drafts slide beneath the benches. Outside, the storm grows stronger. It becomes easy to imagine ancient Scandinavian communities fearing endless winter more than almost anything else. And for good reason. In harsh northern climates, survival always balanced dangerously close to disaster. Historians believe Norse myths surrounding Ragnarsk reflected both environmental anxieties and social instability experienced during difficult periods across medieval Scandinavia. Long winters, famine, volcanic eruptions, and political violence likely shaped these apocalyptic stories over generations. Yet scholars still debate whether Ragnarsk originally symbolized literal destruction or cyclical renewal. Perhaps both. The uncertainty only deepens the myth's power. The seer continues. After the great winter, the sun and moon vanish from the sky. 2 monstrous wolves finally catch their celestial prey after chasing them endlessly through the heavens. Darkness swallows the world, while stars disappear one by one. Simple image, terrifying scale. A young boy sitting nearby grips his carved drinking cup tighter now. Even the warriors lining the walls seem quieter than before. The hall itself feels smaller as the prophecy unfolds. In Norse mythology, fate cannot truly be escaped. Even Odin, king of the gods, knows Ragnarsk will eventually arrive, despite every effort to delay it. That inevitability gives these stories their strange melancholy. The gods are powerful, but not immortal forever. You step toward the longhouse doorway and glance outside briefly. Snowflakes swirl wildly beneath torchlight, while nearby pine trees groan beneath heavy ice. A ship rests frozen beside the dark shoreline, its dragon-headed prow coated with frost. The cold feels immense here, ancient. One fringe theory suggests memories of real climate disasters may have influenced Ragnarsk legends. Some researchers connect parts of the myth to the volcanic winter following massive eruptions during the 6th century, when sunlight dimmed across Europe and temperatures dropped dramatically. Tree ring evidence confirms unusual cooling periods occurred. Whether those events directly shaped Norse apocalypse stories remains uncertain. But the connection feels haunting. You return beside the fire as the seer describes the next omen. The earth itself begins shaking violently. Mountains split open. Sacred trees collapse. And beneath the oceans, the monstrous serpent Jörmungandr rises at last from the depths surrounding Midgard, the world of humans. The old man pauses here deliberately, Only the fire speaks for several moments, crackling softly, breathing sparks upward. Then he continues in a quieter voice. The dead return. In Norse belief, a terrifying ship called Naglfar carries armies of the dead toward the final battle. According to legend, the vessel is constructed entirely from human fingernails, gathered from corpses over centuries. Odd detail, disturbing image. Historians remain unsure why fingernails became linked to this myth specifically. Some suspect symbolic connections involving improper burial rituals or anxieties surrounding death pollution in medieval Scandinavian culture. Others admit nobody truly knows. Ancient fears often survive longer than their explanations. Outside thunder rumbles faintly beyond the storm clouds despite the freezing weather. Several listeners exchange uneasy glances. Even knowing these are stories, you can sense how vividly the Norse imagined the world ending around them. Not peacefully, violently, gloriously. The seer now describes Heimdall, sounding the Gjallar horn, the great warning horn heard across every realm. Gods arm themselves for battle, knowing they cannot ultimately win. Odin rides toward death willingly. Thor confronts the world serpent. Tyr faces the monstrous hound Garm. Everyone marches toward destiny, fully aware of the outcome. That tragic courage sits at the heart of Ragnarsk. Perhaps that explains why the myth endured so powerfully. The Norse admired bravery against impossible odds, not guaranteed victory. You notice frost creeping slowly along the edges of the longhouse doorway now. Someone adds more wood to the fire, while sparks burst briefly through the smoky air. The warm glow flickers across shields hanging along the walls. A woman near the back of the hall quietly recites part of the prophecy from memory before the seer even reaches it. Clearly, these stories were repeated often during long northern winters. Shared fear becomes tradition surprisingly quickly. One lesser-known medieval account claims some Viking warriors genuinely believed signs of Ragnarsk appeared before major battles or unusual celestial events. Strange weather eclipses or comets occasionally stirred whispers that the final age had begun. Humans repeatedly search for endings. Every generation seems convinced it might witness the last days. The seer's voice softens further now. He describes the final battle across the shattered plain of Vigr, where gods, giants, monsters, and the dead collide beneath a burning sky. The wolf Fenrir devours Odin. Thor kills Jörmungandr, but dies moments later from its venom. Fire giants consume the world in flame. Then comes silence. The listeners stare quietly into the fire. No one moves. Even the storm outside seems calmer somehow. Yet Ragnarsk does not end entirely in darkness. This part surprises you. After destruction, the world rises again from the sea. Green forests return. Surviving gods gather beneath open skies. Two human beings emerge from hiding to begin humanity anew. Life continues, changed but alive. Historians often note this cycle of destruction and rebirth distinguished Ragnarsk from many purely catastrophic apocalypse myths. The Norse worldview accepted endings as necessary parts of renewal. Still frightening, still painful, but not meaningless. You drift toward the doorway once more, while the gathering slowly relaxes around the fading fire. Some listeners begin speaking quietly again. Others prepare sleeping blankets along the hall walls, while snow continues falling steadily outside. Above the storm clouds, hidden stars turn silently over the frozen north. The same stars Viking sailors followed across dangerous oceans. The same stars ancient seers studied while imagining wolves chasing the sun toward destruction. And perhaps somewhere deep within those endless winter nights, The people listening to these prophecies found strange comfort in them too. Because if even gods must face the end bravely, perhaps humans can as well. The fire burns lower now. The wind softens, and beyond the frozen fjords, the world waits patiently for dawn. Section 5. The comet appears without warning above Imperial China. You stand within the outer courtyard of the Royal Observatory, while cold midnight air drifts through carved stone archways. Bronze instruments glimmer beneath torchlight. Silk banners snap softly in the wind. Far below the palace walls, the capital city sleeps beneath a blanket of mist and chimney smoke. But nobody inside the observatory is sleeping tonight. Court astronomers stare upward in horror, because a blazing object has entered the heavens. Its long white tail stretches across the sky like a crack, spreading through darkness itself. The comet hangs above the horizon silently, impossibly bright, while frightened officials whisper behind folded sleeves. In ancient China, the sky belonged to the emperor, and when the sky changed unexpectedly, disaster usually followed. You move carefully across polished stone floors, while servants rush between chambers carrying bamboo scrolls and ink brushes. The atmosphere feels tense, but controlled like a building quietly preparing for an earthquake. Nobody raises their voice. Fear here wears ceremonial robes. The chief astronomer stands near the open terrace, studying the comet through a bronze sighting tube. His face remains unreadable, though his fingers grip the instrument tightly enough for his knuckles to pale beneath lantern light. Nearby scribes record every visible detail: color, direction, brightness, movement. Nothing is ignored. Historians know ancient Chinese astronomers maintained some of the world's most sophisticated celestial records for over 2,000 years. Court officials carefully documented eclipses, sunspots, novae, and comets with remarkable precision. Yet astronomy and prophecy remained deeply connected. The heavens reflected earthly harmony, or heavenly anger. A comet could signal rebellion, famine, plague, assassination, or dynastic collapse, depending upon its appearance and location. Some imperial records describe these celestial visitors as broom stars, sweeping corruption and disaster across the empire. Simple phrase, unsettling image. You step onto the observatory terrace overlooking the sleeping city below. Rain from earlier storms still clings to curved rooftops, reflecting scattered moonlight between narrow streets. Somewhere in the darkness, temple bells ring softly through the fog. The comet remains overhead, watching. One young official quietly recites a line from an older prophecy text, warning that when stars grow tails, kingdoms tremble. Several nearby scholars lower their eyes immediately afterward. Superstition carried dangerous weight here, especially near emperors. Ancient Chinese rulers depended heavily upon celestial legitimacy. The concept, later called the mandate of heaven, suggested emperors ruled only with divine approval. Natural disasters and strange astronomical events implied heaven itself might withdraw support from the throne, which meant comets threatened more than public morale. They threatened political stability. You notice the smell of wet cedar wood mixing with lamp oil and ink inside the observatory corridors. Servants continue replacing candles as officials compare the comet against centuries of archived records stored within lacquered cabinets. The empire searches desperately for precedent tonight, for reassurance. But reassurance proves difficult beneath a burning sky. One lesser-known account from the Han Dynasty describes an emperor becoming so terrified after a comet sighting that he temporarily withdrew from court, entirely refusing public ceremonies for several days. Historians still debate whether these reactions reflected genuine fear or carefully staged political caution. Perhaps both. Powerful people often become highly superstitious when they have everything to lose. The chief astronomer finally speaks quietly to the gathered officials. His voice sounds steady, though exhaustion shadows his eyes. Based upon the comet's position, he warns that unrest may soon spread across western provinces. Military commanders should prepare. Tax revolts may follow, and the emperor must perform corrective rituals immediately. Nobody argues, because nobody truly knows how seriously to take the omen. That uncertainty becomes its own form of power. You drift deeper into the observatory, where enormous star maps cover silk screens along the walls. Tiny silver markings represent constellations tied to imperial fortunes, seasonal harvests, and sacred cosmic balance. Ancient Chinese astronomy achieved extraordinary mathematical sophistication, yet emotional fear still shaped interpretations of the unknown sky above. Reason and anxiety walked side by side here too. Just like Babylon, just like Delphi, perhaps humans never fully separate knowledge from fear. Outside, the wind grows stronger across the palace rooftops. Bamboo chimes rattle softly, while clouds slide beneath the comet's pale tail. The city itself remains mostly unaware of the panic unfolding above it. Most citizens still sleep peacefully. For now, you hear hurried footsteps approaching from below. A messenger arrives carrying sealed reports from distant border regions. Bandit raids, crop failures, unusual flooding along southern rivers. Ordinary problems for a massive empire. Yet tonight, every difficulty suddenly feels connected to the comet overhead. That is the strange danger of prophecy. Once people expect catastrophe, they begin seeing confirmation everywhere. Ancient records reveal many Chinese courts responded to celestial omens with immediate political actions. Emperors reduced taxes, released prisoners, performed public repentance rituals, or replaced unpopular officials after major astronomical events. Fear changed governance. The heavens shaped decisions, and decisions shaped history. You pause beside an elderly archivist, carefully unrolling a much older scroll describing a similar comet decades earlier. His thin hands tremble slightly as he traces faded symbols beneath candlelight. The previous appearance, according to the record, preceded civil unrest and the sudden death of a noble family. Coincidence, perhaps. But coincidence becomes terrifying when preserved in official archives. The comet brightens briefly through thinning clouds now. Several younger scribes glance upward nervously before lowering their heads again. One quietly touches a protective charm hidden beneath his robes. Even scholars crave protection from uncertainty. A fringe legend from later Chinese folklore claimed certain comets were not natural objects at all, but celestial dragons crossing the heavens to inspect human corruption before dynasties collapsed. Beautiful image. Disturbing implication. Historians generally dismiss such stories as symbolic mythology rather than literal belief among court astronomers. Still, symbols matter deeply during frightened times, especially imperial frightened times. Midnight slowly fades toward dawn, while the observatory remains awake beneath the strange sky. Tea cools untouched beside stacks of scrolls. Ink brushes dry beside unfinished calculations. Nobody seems willing to leave the terrace while the comet remains visible, as though looking away might somehow worsen the omen. Below the palace, faint rooster calls begin echoing through hidden courtyards. The first hints of morning gray appear along the eastern horizon, though the comet still burns clearly overhead. Silent, persistent. The chief astronomer finally orders a formal report prepared for the emperor before sunrise. His assistants bow quickly and disappear into lower chambers, carrying tablets and scrolls beneath their sleeves. Outside, light rain begins falling softly again. Tiny droplets shimmer against lantern glow, while cool mist rolls across the observatory stones. You rest your hands along the terrace railing and gaze once more toward the sky above ancient China. How many people throughout history have looked upward, searching desperately for meaning in strange lights? Probably countless. Perhaps that search never truly ends. The comet slowly fades as dawn approaches, though fear remains behind like smoke after extinguished fire. Court officials descend toward the palace, carrying warnings no emperor ever enjoys hearing. Disaster may be coming. Prepare accordingly. And high above the waking empire, the pale morning sky quietly swallows the final traces of the burning omen at last. Section 6. The books are locked away beneath Rome. You descend narrow stone steps, lit only by trembling torchlight, while cool underground air brushes against your skin. Moisture drips softly from the ceiling into shallow puddles below. Above you, the enormous city still groans with life, even at this late hour. Chariot wheels rattle faintly across distant streets. Taverns spill drunken laughter into crowded alleys. Somewhere beyond the Forum, dogs bark toward the darkened hills. But down here, beneath the temple of Jupiter, Rome speaks in whispers. Because this chamber holds the Sibylline books, and Romans only open them when they are afraid. The old priest leading you downward moves carefully, his pale robes brushing across ancient stone, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. 2 guards follow closely behind, carrying bronze lanterns, whose smoke curls upward into the darkness. Nobody talks much. Fear does not require volume. The chamber finally opens before you. Rows of sealed wooden cabinets line the walls beneath painted images of forgotten gods and burning stars. The air smells of cedar oil dust, damp parchment, and faint incense, lingering from earlier rituals. At the center stands a stone table. Empty for now. Ancient Roman tradition claimed the Sibylline books originated from a mysterious prophetess called the Sibyl, who once offered sacred writings to a Roman king centuries earlier. According to legend, the king initially refused her enormous asking price. So, the Sibyl burned several books, then offered the remaining ones again at the same price. After repeating this bizarre negotiation multiple times, the terrified king finally purchased the surviving texts. Fewer books, same cost. Strange story. Unforgettable warning. Historians generally agree some collection of prophetic writings genuinely existed in Rome for centuries, guarded carefully by appointed priests. Yet scholars still debate how much of the surviving legend surrounding the Sibyl emerged later through myth-making and political embellishment. The truth remains frustratingly unclear, which somehow suits prophecy perfectly. Tonight, Rome needs answers again. You climb beside the priests toward the central chamber, while torchlight flickers across nervous faces. Outside these hidden walls, disaster spreads through the city above. Crops have failed across several provinces. Illness moves through crowded neighborhoods. Reports of rebellion arrive daily from distant territories. And recently, strange omens appeared in the sky. Comets, lightning strikes, a shower of stones reported near the countryside. Roman citizens fear the gods are angry. When Rome became frightened enough, officials consulted the Sibylline books, searching for divine guidance. The texts supposedly contained cryptic instructions regarding rituals, sacrifices, and emergency actions required to restore harmony between Rome and the gods. Not predictions, exactly. More like sacred damage control. You notice several priests washing their hands carefully inside bronze basins before approaching the cabinets. Ritual purity matters deeply here. One elderly official murmurs prayers beneath his breath, while another unlocks the wooden doors using heavy iron keys hanging from his belt. The sound echoes softly underground. metal against metal. Slow, careful. Inside the cabinet rests a collection of ancient scrolls wrapped in dark cloth. The priests handle them with almost painful delicacy, as though touching something alive or dangerous. One younger attendant visibly trembles while helping carry the scrolls toward the stone table. He keeps glancing upward nervously, perhaps imagining the weight of the city pressing overhead. Because the fate of Rome sometimes feels balanced upon words written centuries earlier. A lesser-known Roman rumor claimed unauthorized reading of the Sibylline prophecies could bring terrible misfortune, or even death. Whether anyone truly believed this remains uncertain, though Roman authorities certainly treated the texts with extraordinary secrecy. Fear protects sacred objects very effectively. You sit quietly near the chamber wall, while the priests begin unrolling one fragile scroll after another beneath the lantern light. Faded Greek lettering stretches across brittle surfaces, stained by age and smoke. The room becomes utterly silent. Only dripping water remains. One priest finally begins reading aloud. His voice sounds strained. The prophecy describes foreign enemies crossing sacred boundaries, while fire falls from heaven and disease spreads among the people. To prevent catastrophe, Rome must perform purification rituals and honor neglected deities before the next full moon. Simple instructions, enormous consequences. Outside the chamber, thunder rumbles faintly above the city streets. Several priests exchange uneasy glances immediately. Even coincidence feels meaningful in moments like this, perhaps especially coincidence. Historians know Roman leaders frequently used religion and omens to shape political decisions during crises. Public rituals reassured frightened populations while reinforcing state authority. Yet many officials likely believed sincerely in divine warnings too. Ancient people rarely separated politics from spirituality completely. The gods belong to governance, and governance belonged to the gods. You move closer toward the stone table, where additional prophecies are being examined now. One passage warns of darkened skies and poisoned water supplies if proper sacrifices fail. Another references unrest among Rome's allies. The language remains frustratingly symbolic, deliberately vague, like nearly all successful prophecies throughout history. One priest quietly mentions reports of unusual births recently spreading through the countryside. Deformed livestock, two-headed calves, animals behaving strangely before storms. Romans interpreted such events as terrifying omens called prodigies. Modern science offers simpler explanations now, but fear never required scientific precision. The underground chamber feels colder suddenly. Moisture beads along the stone walls, while the lantern flames flicker unevenly in a passing draft. Somewhere deeper below the temple, you hear faint rushing water moving beneath the city itself. Rome feels ancient down here, older than empire, older than certainty. A scholarly debate still continues regarding how accurately later Roman historians described the Sibylline consultations. Some researchers suspect officials selectively interpreted prophecies afterward to justify decisions already made politically. Others argue genuine panic often drove these rituals during periods of crisis. Both possibilities feel believable. After all, frightened governments still search desperately for certainty. The chief priest finally rises from the table after hours of examination. Exhaustion shadows his face beneath the wavering torchlight. He announces the required rituals solemnly to the others, gathered nearby. Public sacrifices, temple offerings, special ceremonies across the city. The gods must be appeased immediately. Messengers depart quickly, carrying sealed instructions toward officials waiting above ground. Their footsteps fade rapidly along the stone corridor, while the remaining priests continue guarding the sacred texts. Outside, rain begins falling steadily across Rome. You can hear it faintly now, against the temple roof far overhead. Soft. Relentless. The strange thing about prophecy is not whether it predicts the future correctly. It is how deeply belief alone can reshape human behavior. Entire cities change course because of feared possibilities whispered in dark rooms. Rome itself bends tonight beneath ancient words. One final rumor lingers among the priests before dawn approaches. Some quietly believe the Sibylline books contain prophecies too dangerous to reveal publicly. Warnings capable of causing panic across the empire itself. Nobody confirms this openly. Nobody dismisses it either. Eventually, the scrolls are wrapped carefully once more and return to their hidden cabinets beneath the temple. Locks click shut. Keys disappear beneath robes. The chamber slowly empties into silence again. Only the scent of extinguished lantern smoke remains. You climb the narrow stairs back toward the waking city above, while pale morning light begins touching Rome's rooftops. Vendors prepare market stalls. Bakers light ovens. Citizens continue ordinary routines, mostly unaware of the fearful rituals unfolding beneath their feet during the night. Yet somewhere inside the temple below, ancient prophecies wait patiently in darkness, ready for the next disaster. Ready for the next frightened generation seeking answers from the unknown. Section 7. The jungle swallows sound differently at night. You move carefully along a narrow stone path, while humid air clings warmly against your skin. Cicadas pulse from the darkness in steady waves. Rainwater drips from enormous ceiba trees overhead, splashing softly onto moss-covered ruins hidden beneath tangled vines. Ahead of you, torchlight flickers across towering temple steps. The priests are already waiting. Deep within the Mayan world, entire cities once measured time with astonishing precision. Their astronomers tracked planetary cycles, eclipses, solstices, and sacred calendars so accurately that modern scholars still marvel at their calculations. But alongside that brilliance lived another belief. That time itself could become dangerous, and when sacred cycles ended, catastrophe might follow. You climb slowly toward the temple summit, while smoke from burning copal resin drifts through the warm night air. The smell is sweet and earthy, mixing with damp stone and distant rainstorms rolling somewhere beyond the jungle canopy. The city below remains mostly dark now. Only scattered fires glow between pyramids and courtyards. A young acolyte passes beside you carrying folded bark paper codices beneath his arm. His painted face remains expressionless, though his eyes keep drifting nervously toward the sky above. Because Venus has appeared unusually bright tonight. And that matters here. Ancient Maya astronomers studied Venus obsessively, associating the planet with warfare, divine power, and dangerous transitions. Surviving codices reveal detailed calculations predicting Venus cycles across decades. The heavens formed part of a sacred clock, and every movement carried meaning. Historians generally agree Mayan astronomy ranked among the most sophisticated scientific achievements in the ancient Americas. Yet scholars still debate how ordinary citizens interpreted these celestial calculations emotionally. Did they genuinely fear approaching cycles? Or did priestly elites amplify cosmic anxiety to maintain authority? The answer remains uncertain beneath the jungle silence. At the top of the pyramid, you step onto a broad stone platform overlooking endless black forest, stretching beneath moonlight. The night feels enormous here, alive somehow. The chief priest kneels beside painted glyphs carved into a low altar, while several assistants arrange ceremonial objects nearby. Obsidian blades, jaguar pelts, bowls filled with cacao and flowers. No one speaks above a whisper. The stars feel too close tonight, One elderly astronomer points toward Venus near the horizon, while tracing symbols carefully across folded bark paper. He murmurs calculations regarding sacred calendar alignments approaching soon. The end of a cycle, potential instability, possible drought. Simple words, heavy fear. Modern discussions about Mayan prophecies often become tangled with exaggerated myths about world endings, especially surrounding the famous long count calendar. In reality, Mayan civilization viewed time more cyclically than apocalyptically. Still, cycles ending could absolutely signal danger, particularly when combined with environmental stress or political instability. And ancient Maya cities experienced both frequently. You sit quietly near the platform edge, while warm jungle wind rustles through palm leaves below. Somewhere in the darkness, howler monkeys cry across the forest with voices almost human enough to feel unsettling. The chief priest begins reciting older prophecies now. Warnings of failed rains, starving crops, cities abandoned beneath vines. The imagery feels disturbingly specific. One fringe theory suggests prolonged droughts contributed significantly to the collapse of several major classic Maya cities between the 8th and 9th centuries. Climate evidence strongly supports periods of severe drought during parts of this era. Yet historians still argue fiercely about how much environmental collapse alone explains the decline. Warfare, trade disruption, political fragmentation, all likely played roles. Civilizations rarely collapse for only one reason. The priest's voice grows softer, while nearby torches hiss in the damp air. He describes sacred cenotes, opening pathways between worlds, where gods communicated through water, sacrifice, and prophecy. You remember stories whispered earlier in the city about strange changes near one nearby cenote. Water levels dropping unexpectedly, fish floating lifeless along the edges, unusual smells rising from below. The jungle notices imbalance before humans do. At least, that is what many here believe. You glance outward again across the endless forest. Thousands of unseen insects pulse rhythmically beneath the trees, while mist drifts slowly between ruined structures, swallowed partly by vegetation. Beautiful place. Fragile place. One young priest suddenly interrupts the ceremony after spotting a meteor streaking across the sky. Several attendants inhale sharply. Even brief celestial events carry enormous symbolic weight here. The chief astronomer studies the sky silently for several moments before continuing. But the atmosphere has changed now. Fear spreads quietly. Ancient Maya rulers often linked their legitimacy directly to cosmic order. Successful kings maintained harmony between heaven's earth and society through ritual performance and astronomical precision. When crops failed or disasters multiplied, rulers themselves became vulnerable. The stars judged leadership too. You notice tiny beads of moisture gathering along carved temple stones beneath the humid night. Moss glows faintly green beside flickering firelight. Somewhere below, drums begin sounding softly from the city center. Slow rhythm, heartbeat rhythm. The priests prepare a ritual offering beside the altar while continuing calculations from the codices. Their fingers move carefully across columns of symbols representing sacred dates and planetary cycles. Everything here feels interconnected. Time, politics, weather, the movement of Venus itself. One surviving inscription from a Mayan site describes a ruler performing ceremonies specifically to prevent cosmic disorder during dangerous calendar transitions. Historians interpret these rituals partly as political theater, partly as genuine spiritual necessity. Perhaps the distinction barely mattered. If enough people believe the cosmos feels unstable, society changes accordingly. The jungle wind strengthens briefly now, carrying distant thunder through the darkness. Several torches flicker violently before steadying again. The chief priest raises his gaze toward the clouds gathering beyond the horizon. Rain should comfort everyone. Instead, uncertainty remains. Because prophecies rarely offer clarity. Only tension. You begin descending slightly from the platform while the ceremony continues behind you. Drums echo upward from the city below, alongside faint chanting carried through the humid air. Fireflies drift lazily among the lower temple stairs, like wandering sparks. For a moment, the ancient city feels suspended outside ordinary time, waiting, listening. The strange thing about Mayan prophecy is how deeply it tied human fate to cosmic rhythm. Modern people often imagine history moving forward endlessly. The Maya imagined repeating cycles capable of renewal or collapse, depending upon balance. That worldview feels strangely calming and strangely terrifying, because cycles always return eventually. Another meteor flashes briefly overhead before vanishing into darkness. No one speaks afterward. Even the jungle sounds quieter now beneath the heavy clouds gathering above the forest. The priests continue watching Venus carefully, watching the sacred calendars, watching for signs hidden within time itself. And somewhere beneath the endless canopy, ancient stone cities wait silently, while prophecy and astronomy intertwine beneath a restless tropical sky. Section 8. The dream begins beside the Nile. You lie awake within the palace walls of ancient Egypt, while warm desert wind slips softly through linen curtains. Outside, moonlight stretches across slow-moving black water, where reeds sway gently beside anchored fishing boats. Somewhere beyond the royal gardens, temple musicians play distant harps beneath the stars. Yet sleep refuses to remain peaceful tonight, because Pharaoh has dreamed of famine again, and the dream feels too vivid to ignore. You walk through dim palace corridors, lit by shallow oil lamps, while servants whisper anxiously along painted walls covered with images of gods, falcons, and sacred rivers. Sandals brush quietly against polished stone floors, cooled by the night air. Nobody speaks openly about the dream. But everyone knows. In ancient Egypt, dreams carried dangerous weight, especially royal dreams. The Egyptians believed certain visions opened temporary doorways between the human world and divine realms. Gods could warn, instruct, or threaten through carefully chosen symbols appearing during sleep. And sometimes, according to temple interpreters, the future revealed itself there first. You enter a long chamber filled with incense smoke drifting beneath towering painted columns. Several priests already wait beside low tables, scattered with scrolls and carved figurines representing protective deities. The atmosphere feels tense, not chaotic. Worse, controlled fear. At the center of the room sits Pharaoh himself, silent beneath flickering torchlight. Gold jewelry glimmers faintly across his wrists and collar, though exhaustion shadows his face. Nearby attendants avoid direct eye contact, while scribes prepare to record every spoken word carefully. Because dreams spoken aloud become part of history. The chief interpreter kneels before the throne and asks Pharaoh to describe the vision once more. Slowly, exactly. Pharaoh's voice remains calm at first. He describes standing beside the Nile beneath an unnatural sky, while 7 healthy cattle emerged from the riverbanks. Then came 7 starving cattle with hollow eyes and exposed ribs. The thin cattle devoured the healthy ones, yet remained starving afterward. The chamber grows quieter. Even the incense smoke seems motionless now. Then Pharaoh describes a second vision, involving healthy grain consumed by blackened stalks, shriveled beneath hot desert winds. The symbolism feels obvious, but terrifying. Historians recognize this biblical-era story, primarily through later Hebrew traditions surrounding Joseph in Egypt, though dream interpretation itself held enormous importance throughout Egyptian culture long before and after those accounts emerged. Ancient Egyptian dream manuals even survived into modern times, listing symbolic meanings for specific visions. Some interpretations sound oddly practical, others feel deeply unsettling. One surviving text warns that dreaming of dark water could signal approaching illness or social unrest. Another claims seeing oneself stare into polished bronze mirrors foretold hidden enemies nearby. Simple imagery, heavy consequences. You notice the smell of myrrh and burning cedar thickening inside the chamber, while priests exchange uneasy glances beside painted scroll racks. Outside, distant thunder murmurs faintly across the desert horizon, though no rain falls. The Nile determines nearly everything here. Flooding patterns decide harvests. Harvests decide stability. And failed harvests can destroy kingdoms quietly. Modern historians know ancient Egypt experienced repeated periods of famine connected to unpredictable Nile flooding cycles. Environmental shifts could devastate food supplies rapidly, despite the civilization's remarkable agricultural organization. Perhaps that reality made famine prophecies especially terrifying. People fear most what they already understand intimately. The chief interpreter finally speaks carefully. The dreams warn of abundance followed by catastrophe. Years of prosperity will arrive first, then terrible famine. The priests recommend immediate preparation. Store grain, expand reserves, appease the gods before the Nile changes temperament. Nobody in the chamber appears relieved by this interpretation, because prophecy rarely comforts rulers. You drift toward an open balcony overlooking the river, while cool night air brushes softly against your skin. Palm trees rustle below beneath silver moonlight. The Nile itself moves slowly through darkness like liquid obsidian. Beautiful river. Dangerous river. One lesser-known Egyptian belief suggested dreams occurring near dawn possessed greater prophetic power because boundaries between worlds weakened before sunrise. Several priests quietly debate the timing of Pharaoh's vision now, with obvious concern. Timing matters here. Everything symbolic matters. A young scribe nearby accidentally spills ink across part of a scroll while recording the interpretation. He freezes immediately horrified by his mistake. Another attendant whispers a hurried protective prayer before helping clean the table. Fear spreads through tiny gestures first. The chief priest orders offerings prepared from multiple temples across the kingdom before morning arrives. Sacred rituals must restore balance between divine forces and earthly stability. Ancient Egyptian religion centered heavily upon maintaining cosmic order, known as Ma'at. Famine, political unrest, or natural disaster signaled dangerous imbalance, threatening civilization itself. The gods expected harmony. Chaos waited constantly beyond it. You continue listening while additional interpreters analyze smaller details from Pharaoh's dream. Why cattle specifically? Why 7? Why did the starving animals remain thin even after feeding? The discussion becomes almost mathematical in its precision. Yet uncertainty remains everywhere beneath it. Historians still argue whether ancient dream interpretation functioned primarily as sincere spiritual practice or sophisticated political advising wrapped inside religious language. Likely both. Human beings rarely separate belief from power cleanly. Outside the palace, The first hints of dawn begin softening the eastern horizon. Birds stir faintly among reeds beside the riverbanks. Somewhere nearby, workers already prepare bread ovens for the coming day. Ordinary life continues quietly, completely unaware that prophecy now shadows the kingdom. One strange fringe account from later Egyptian folklore claims certain temple interpreters slept intentionally inside sacred chambers, hoping gods might send clarifying dreams regarding earlier prophecies. Dreams inside dreams. Warnings layered upon warnings. Whether such rituals truly occurred remains uncertain, though sleep temples certainly existed in parts of the ancient Mediterranean world. The possibility alone feels eerie enough. You return toward the throne chamber as priests finalize their recommendations. Pharaoh listens silently, while torch flames flicker across painted walls, depicting eternal harvests and divine protection. Those paintings feel less reassuring now. The Nile breeze strengthens slightly, carrying cool moisture through the open corridors. Several lamps sputter briefly before steadying again. Somewhere distant thunder sounds once more. Still no rain. The chief interpreter lowers his head respectfully before delivering the final warning. Preparation may soften suffering, but the famine itself cannot be prevented. That sentence settles heavily across the room. Because humans tolerate hardship more easily than helplessness. You glance once more toward the river outside, while dawn slowly brightens the palace gardens. Soon, Egypt will awaken beneath another golden morning, filled with trade labor worship and ordinary concerns. Yet inside these chambers, the future already feels altered. The dream has changed everything. Perhaps that is the true power of prophecy. Not predicting events perfectly, but reshaping human choices long before events arrive. Far below the balcony, Nile water laps gently against stone embankments, while priests continue whispering about famine gods and uncertain years approaching beyond the horizon. And somewhere between sleep and waking ancient Egypt waits nervously beside the river that gives life, and sometimes takes it away. Section 9. The sea looks wrong tonight. You stand along the cliffs of a bright island city, while salty wind whips against your face. Below, dark waves crash harder than usual against volcanic rock, sending white foam high into narrow harbors, crowded with fishing boats. Lanterns sway violently from wooden docks, while nervous sailors glance repeatedly toward the mountain rising at the island's center. Something beneath the earth is waking, and everyone can feel it. The island of Thera thrives during the Bronze Age as a wealthy trading center connected to the powerful Minoan civilization. Elegant homes line steep streets painted in bright colors. Markets overflow with saffron olive oil wine and fine pottery carried across the Aegean Sea. At sunset, the city still appears beautiful, almost peaceful. But beneath your sandals, faint tremors continue rippling through the ground. Tiny at first, then stronger. You walk carefully through crowded streets where residents whisper uneasily beside shuttered shops and smoking cooking fires. The smell of seawater mixes with sulfur drifting faintly through the warm evening air. Children stop laughing first. Animals become restless next. A mule suddenly refuses to move uphill, despite its owner pulling hard against the reins. Nearby dogs bark endlessly toward the mountain towering above the island. People notice, but few leave. Humans rarely abandon beautiful places easily. Historians and archaeologists believe the volcanic eruption of Thera on modern Santorini became one of the largest eruptions in recorded human history sometime during the 2nd millennium BCE. Entire settlements vanished beneath ash, while tsunamis devastated nearby coastlines. Some researchers even connect the catastrophe loosely to later legends about Atlantis, though historians strongly debate those comparisons. Still, the destruction itself was undeniably real. You continue uphill toward a temple terrace overlooking the harbor below. Priests burn fragrant herbs inside shallow bronze bowls, while worried citizens gather nearby seeking reassurance. Instead, they receive omens. One elderly priest describes recurring dreams involving black waves swallowing ships beneath a blood-colored sky. Another claims sacred spring water turned unusually warm several days earlier. Small signs, accumulating signs. The island feels tense with unfinished warning. A fringe local belief among later Mediterranean storytellers claimed birds abandoned Thera entirely before the eruption began. Modern scientists doubt such dramatic accounts happened exactly as described, though animals absolutely can react to seismic changes before humans recognize danger. Either way, the image lingers. Empty skies above a doomed island. The temple bells ring softly in the growing wind, while priests study the mountain carefully. Smoke rises faintly near the summit, now thin enough for many citizens to dismiss as harmless. But the smell grows stronger. Sulfur, hot minerals, something sharp beneath the sea breeze. You lean against a low stone wall overlooking the harbor, while twilight deepens across the Aegean. Fishing boats rock uneasily beside the docks, as sailors debate whether to remain overnight or leave immediately. No one agrees. That uncertainty becomes dangerous. Ancient people living near volcanoes often lacked clear understanding of what mountains like Thera truly were. Occasional tremors and smoke might appear unsettling, but not necessarily apocalyptic, until the eruption starts. Then understanding arrives too late. One merchant nearby insists the gods merely demand larger offerings before the coming harvest festival. Another quietly argues the island should evacuate temporarily until the tremors stop. Their voices remain calm, but their eyes betray fear. The earth suddenly jolts harder beneath your feet. Stone dust falls from nearby rooftops. Several citizens cry out while pottery crashes inside a nearby home. The harbor water ripples strangely for several seconds before settling again. Now panic begins spreading visibly. Not wild panic yet. Organized panic, the most dangerous kind. Families hurry through narrow streets carrying valuables wrapped in cloth. Temple attendants drag sacred statues indoors for protection. Sailors untie boats frantically while arguing over overloaded supplies. Still, the mountain waits, silent for the moment. You notice the sky changing next. A strange reddish glow spreads faintly above the summit, while dark smoke thickens against the fading stars. Ash begins drifting downward lightly across rooftops and olive trees. Soft gray flakes, beautiful at first glance. Terrifying once understood. Historians still debate how quickly Thera's inhabitants realized the scale of the danger approaching them. Excavations uncovered surprisingly few human remains compared to Pompeii, suggesting many residents may have escaped before the worst destruction arrived. Perhaps the warnings lasted longer here. Perhaps prophecy sometimes buys time. You hurry downhill toward the harbor, as ash falls steadily now. The once lively streets feel transformed into corridors of fear, illuminated by torchlight and drifting smoke. Somewhere nearby, someone begins praying loudly to Poseidon. Another prays to completely different gods. When disaster approaches, humans widen their spiritual bets quickly. At the docks, chaos intensifies. Boats push away from shore, overloaded with frightened families, livestock, food supplies, and hurried possessions. Sailors shout above crashing waves, while children cry beneath swirling ash. Then the sea suddenly pulls backward, far backward. The harbor water retreats unnaturally from the shoreline, exposing wet rocks and flopping fish beneath moonlight. Everything becomes quiet. Wrong kind of quiet. Modern scientists recognize this phenomenon clearly as a tsunami warning sign caused by massive displacement beneath the sea. Ancient people would only know something impossible was happening. Several citizens freeze completely. Others begin screaming. A priest near the docks falls to his knees whispering that the gods have abandoned the island entirely. Then the mountain explodes. The sound arrives first. Not thunder, not earthquake. Something deeper. A violent roar shaking the air itself. The summit erupts upward in fire and ash, while enormous clouds burst into the night sky, illuminated by streaks of volcanic lightning. Shockwaves hammer across the harbor, hard enough to knock people onto the stone docks. The heat reaches you moments later. Dry, intense, unnatural. Ships rock violently, while terrified crowds surge toward the remaining boats. Above the island, a towering column of ash climbs impossibly high, into the darkness, swallowing stars one by one. The eruption of Thera likely generated devastating tsunamis across the Mediterranean, affecting distant coastlines and disrupting entire trade networks connected to Bronze Age civilizations. Some historians suspect the disaster weakened Minoan influence significantly. Others argue the decline unfolded more gradually afterward. Civilizations rarely collapse in a single night. But nights like this can begin the process. Ash thickens rapidly, now coating your skin and clothing, while breathing becomes harder with every passing minute. The once beautiful island city disappears slowly beneath drifting darkness and fire-lit smoke. Yet amid the terror, strange moments still emerge. A sailor helping strangers aboard, despite limited space. Parents covering sleeping children from falling ash. Neighbors refusing to abandon elderly relatives during evacuation. Human kindness survives surprisingly long beside catastrophe. The sea begins rushing back toward shore now. Fast, far too fast. You turn one final time toward the island, while towering waves gather beyond the harbor beneath a sky burning red with volcanic fire. And high above an ancient Thera prophecy, fear and disaster finally become the same thing. Section 10. Jerusalem does not sleep easily anymore. You walk through narrow stone streets beneath wavering torchlight, while dry evening wind carries dust across crowded market stalls, already closing for the night. The city smells of olive oil, smoke, sweat, and freshly baked barley bread, cooling beside clay ovens. Above everything rises the temple, golden in daylight, shadowed now beneath gathering clouds. Yet despite the familiar rhythms of evening prayer and commerce, tension lingers everywhere. Roman patrols move carefully through the streets. Merchants whisper behind half-shuttered doors. Families eat quietly indoors, while rumors spread faster than the desert wind itself. Because the prophets have returned to the streets again, and their warnings grow darker each night. You pass a small crowd gathered near a worn stone staircase, where an elderly man stands, wrapped in rough wool robes. His beard moves gently in the evening breeze, while his tired eyes scan the people before him. His voice remains calm, almost sorrowful. He warns that the city stands upon the edge of destruction, that violence breeds more violence, that pride blinds rulers, and rebels alike. Some listeners nod uneasily. Others mock him openly. Prophets in ancient Jerusalem rarely enjoyed popularity. The uncomfortable ones almost never did. Historians know prophetic traditions shaped Jewish society for centuries, especially during periods of political instability, invasion, and exile. Biblical prophets often connected moral corruption with approaching catastrophe, warning that injustice and arrogance invited national disaster. Whether viewed spiritually or politically, their influence was enormous. Words could shake kingdoms here. You continue walking uphill, while the prophet's voice fades behind you into the noisy evening streets. Somewhere nearby, goats bleat impatiently beside wooden pens, while merchants argue softly over final prices before dark. Life continues, yet fear presses invisibly beneath it all. Roman occupation has stretched tensions dangerously thin across Judea during this era. Taxes burden ordinary citizens. Religious divisions deepen. Revolutionary groups whisper about resistance, while Roman authorities respond with increasing force. Everyone senses something approaching. Nobody agrees what it will become. You enter a courtyard near the temple walls, where priests burn incense beneath towering columns lit by flickering oil lamps. The scent of frankincense drifts heavily through the warm night air, while worshippers murmur prayers softly nearby. A younger priest notices unusual cloud formations above the city and quietly exchanges worried glances with another attendant. Omens matter here too, especially during uncertain times. One lesser-known account from later Jewish and Roman writings describes strange signs appearing before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. A mysterious light above the temple, unexplained sounds during the night, even reports of celestial armies seen in the clouds. Historians still debate these stories intensely. Some interpret them as symbolic religious narratives written afterward. Others believe frightened populations genuinely reported strange phenomena during chaotic periods. Fear changes perception powerfully. The temple courtyard grows quieter as night deepens around the city. You rest beside a cool stone pillar, while distant thunder murmurs faintly beyond the hills. A traveling scholar nearby quietly recites older prophetic passages, warning of siege, famine, and exile if violence consumes the city completely. His voice shakes slightly during certain lines, not from uncertainty, from familiarity. Because Jerusalem has already endured destruction before. Ancient memories linger heavily here. The Babylonian conquest, centuries earlier, left deep scars across Jewish identity and religious thought. Prophecies about judgment, exile, and restoration shaped collective memory across generations. Past catastrophes make future warnings feel more believable. You glance outward beyond the city walls, where scattered campfires glow faintly across the surrounding valleys. Roman forces patrol nearby roads constantly now. Travelers entering Jerusalem face tighter inspections each month. The atmosphere feels brittle, like dry wood waiting for sparks. A sudden gust sweeps through the courtyard, scattering ash from several incense burners. Temple attendants rush quickly to steady the flames, while worshippers glance upward nervously. Short moment, heavy silence afterward. Ancient people often interpreted environmental disturbances symbolically during unstable periods. Storms, eclipses, earthquakes, and unusual celestial events acquired emotional significance far beyond their physical reality. Humans search desperately for patterns when societies feel fragile. Perhaps we always have. You leave the temple district and move deeper into the lower city, where ordinary families gather quietly inside cramped homes. Through open windows, you glimpse tired parents comforting children while discussing rumors in hushed voices. War, rebellion, possible siege. Nobody uses calm tones anymore. One woman drawing water from a communal cistern quietly mentions hearing another wandering prophet earlier that morning, predicting the temple itself would someday fall. Stone by stone, the idea sounds impossible. The temple defines Jerusalem, yet impossible things happen regularly in history. Historians continue debating how many prophetic figures moved through Judea during the 1st century. Roman occupation, economic stress, and religious expectation created fertile conditions for charismatic preachers and apocalyptic movements. Some inspired hope, others inspired fear, often both simultaneously. You continue downhill toward the crowded outer markets while moonlight washes pale silver across ancient limestone walls. The city appears beautiful from a distance, but beauty and catastrophe frequently share borders. Near one alleyway, a small group argues heatedly about whether the prophet spread wisdom or panic. One man insists divine judgment approaches because society has abandoned righteousness. Another dismisses the warnings entirely as fear-mongering, designed to manipulate the desperate. Neither convinces the other. That disagreement feels strangely modern. Above the city, clouds finally break open, briefly revealing scattered stars across the desert sky. The wind cools slightly now, carrying faint scents of rain and distant smoke from Roman encampments beyond the hills. A young boy nearby asks his father whether the city will truly fall someday. The father hesitates too long before answering. You feel the tension in that silence, because uncertainty frightens children immediately, and adults eventually. One fringe tradition from later texts claimed certain priests secretly feared the prophecies themselves, but continued public rituals normally to prevent mass panic within the city. Historians cannot confirm such stories reliably. Still, the possibility feels painfully human. Leaders often pretend confidence longest when fear grows strongest. The night deepens further, while Jerusalem settles uneasily beneath the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a shofar horn echoes softly across the rooftops before fading into silence. You pause beside the outer wall overlooking the dark valleys surrounding the city. Olive trees sway gently beneath moonlight, while scattered fires flicker across the hills beyond. Peaceful view. Temporary peace. Within decades, Jerusalem would indeed face catastrophic siege and destruction under Roman forces. Famine, fire, and violence would reshape the city forever, while survivors scattered across distant lands. The prophecies would appear horrifyingly accurate afterward. Whether divine warning or political foresight, they would become unforgettable. Below you, the city continues breathing softly through the night. Families sleep, guards patrol, priests pray. Prophets whisper warnings beneath the same stars, shining above every frightened civilization before collapse. And somewhere among Jerusalem's ancient stones, the uneasy feeling remains that history is already moving towards something nobody can fully stop. Section 11. The tomb should have remained sealed. You stand beneath the burning Mesopotamian sun, while dry wind sweeps dust across a half-buried stone entrance, emerging slowly from the earth. Workers pause nervously beside ropes baskets and bronze tools scattered across the excavation site. Far beyond the ruins, the desert stretches endlessly beneath pale skies shimmering with heat. Nobody here feels comfortable anymore, because strange things have already begun happening. The city of Ur once stood among the greatest centers of the ancient world, flourishing beside fertile rivers, while priests studied stars and kings ruled from towering ziggurats. Now centuries have passed. Sand covers collapsed palaces. Silence fills abandoned streets. Yet beneath the ruins, the dead still wait. You descend carefully into the newly uncovered tomb passage, while torchlight flickers against ancient brick walls stained dark by age and moisture. The air below feels cooler than the desert outside, carrying the sharp scent of clay dust oil smoke, and something older lingering beneath it all. Stillness dominates everything. Even your breathing sounds too loud. Ahead of you, laborers hesitate, beside a sealed inner doorway, carved with faded symbols, warning against disturbing the resting place beyond. One older worker quietly mutters a prayer, before touching the protective amulet hanging around his neck. Ancient Mesopotamians feared restless spirits intensely, and tombs represented dangerous thresholds between worlds. Historians know Mesopotamian cultures developed elaborate beliefs regarding the dead and the underworld. Spirits denied proper burial rites, supposedly wandered among the living, bringing illness, nightmares, and misfortune. The boundary separating life and death felt frighteningly thin, especially underground. You step closer toward the carved doorway, while one temple official studies the inscriptions carefully by torchlight. His face tightens almost immediately. The symbols contain more than burial blessings. They contain warnings. One translated passage describes the king who sees the dark future beneath the earth. Another warns that disturbing sacred sleep will awaken suffering not yet written into time itself. Beautiful language, unpleasant implication. The workers exchange uneasy glances while the official continues reading silently. No one seems eager to open the tomb now. Yet curiosity pushes harder than fear, surprisingly often. Finally, the seal breaks. Stone grinds heavily against stone, while stale air escapes from the darkness beyond, carrying scents untouched for centuries. The smell feels strangely dry and bitter, like old cedar wood mixed with ancient dust. Several workers instinctively step backward. You understand why immediately. The chamber inside remains astonishingly preserved. Gold ornaments glimmer faintly beside carved furniture, and ceremonial objects arranged carefully around a stone sarcophagus. Painted murals still cover portions of the walls, depicting processions, stars, rivers, and shadowy figures entering the underworld. But one image draws every eye immediately: a priest kneeling before a blackened sky filled with falling stars, and beside him a city burning. Mesopotamian civilizations often connected celestial events with earthly catastrophe. Omens recorded on surviving clay tablets warned rulers about eclipses, comets, and planetary alignments, supposedly predicting invasion, famine, or dynastic collapse. This tomb appears to preserve similar fears, only more personal. One younger assistant notices additional writing along the lower wall, partially hidden beneath dust. He brushes the surface gently with trembling fingers, while another scribe moves closer, carrying a wax tablet for copying symbols. The inscription mentions, "The year rivers fail." Then, the king without descendants. Then, fire from heaven. The chamber grows colder somehow after those words emerge, or perhaps everyone simply imagines it. Historians still debate how literally ancient Mesopotamians believed funerary curses and prophetic inscriptions. Some scholars argue such warnings served primarily to deter grave robbers. Others suspect genuine spiritual terror surrounded disturbed burials. Either way, people behaved cautiously around tombs for good reason. Fear itself becomes protection. You wander slowly through the burial chamber, while torchlight dances across ceremonial objects, untouched for generations. Bronze cups, jewelry, clay tablets stacked carefully inside wooden boxes, now partly decayed with age. One box contains astronomical records. Another contains funeral hymns. A third appears filled entirely with prophecies. The chief scribe unrolls one fragile tablet carefully beneath the firelight. His lips move silently, while reading cuneiform symbols pressed into clay thousands of years earlier. Then his expression changes. Subtly, but unmistakably. He reads aloud at last. "When the sacred rivers retreat, and the moon turns red, strangers shall inherit the cities of kings." No one responds immediately. No one. Outside the tomb entrance, wind moans softly across the ruins above, like distant voices moving through empty streets. Ancient Mesopotamia experienced repeated invasions, droughts, floods, and dynastic collapse across centuries. Civilizations rose rapidly beside the Tigris and Euphrates before disappearing beneath conquest or environmental decline. Perhaps these prophecies reflected historical memory more than supernatural foresight. People who witness collapse repeatedly begin expecting it everywhere. You notice another painted figure along the tomb wall, now partly illuminated beside the sarcophagus. Unlike the others, this figure appears blindfolded while holding a staff toward the stars. A prophet, perhaps, or a priest, or both. One fringe tradition from later Near Eastern folklore claimed certain Mesopotamian priests performed rituals inside burial chambers specifically to receive visions from dead rulers regarding future disasters. Historians cannot verify such stories clearly. Still, many ancient cultures linked underground spaces with prophetic knowledge. Darkness itself feels visionary sometimes. The workers grow increasingly nervous as more inscriptions are translated. Several quietly ask permission to leave before sunset. One refuses entirely to touch the tablets anymore after discovering symbols associated with underworld deities carved beneath them. Rational or not, fear spreads quickly underground, especially where silence dominates. You approach the sarcophagus itself now, while dust drifts lazily through torchlight overhead. Fine cracks spread across the stone lid, carved with protective symbols worn smooth by centuries. No one wants to open it, yet everyone keeps staring at it. The chief official finally orders the chamber sealed again until priests can perform cleansing rituals above ground. His voice sounds controlled, though sweat glistens visibly along his forehead, despite the cool air below. Some objects will be removed first, particularly the tablets. Knowledge always tempts humans hardest, even frightening knowledge. Outside evening slowly approaches across the desert ruins, while workers carry recovered artifacts carefully toward the surface. The sky burns orange above ancient Ur. Long shadows stretch between broken walls and collapsed temples, abandoned long ago by kings who once believed their cities eternal. Nothing feels eternal here now, only buried. One final tablet receives translation before the tomb entrance closes for the night. The inscription warns that those who wake forgotten kings awaken forgotten grief beside them. Cryptic sentence, difficult to ignore. Historians continue arguing whether ancient prophecies revealed genuine spiritual belief, political messaging, or simple human pattern-seeking across chaotic centuries. Perhaps all three intertwine too deeply to separate. You climb back into the cooling desert evening, while workers reseal the tomb below with visible relief. Wind sweeps softly across the ruins, carrying the smell of sand-old stone and distant river water through the fading light. Behind you, beneath the earth, the dead remain silent once more. For now. And somewhere inside the buried darkness of ancient Mesopotamia, forgotten prophecies wait patiently beside sleeping kings. Section 12. The moon above Carthage turns red slowly. You stand along the upper terraces overlooking the great North African harbor, while warm sea wind carries salt smoke and spice through the sleeping city. Far below, merchant ships rock gently beside crowded docks, where lanterns sway against dark water. Normally, Carthage never truly rests, but tonight feels different. People have stopped talking, because the eclipse has begun. The moon darkens gradually above the Mediterranean, while priests gather along temple rooftops, carrying bronze bowls filled with burning resin. The crimson glow spreading across the sky reflects faintly against white stone walls and polished courtyards below. Children stare upward silently. Dogs whine beside doorways. Even the sea feels quieter. Ancient Carthage rose into one of the wealthiest and most powerful cities of the Mediterranean world, commanding enormous trade networks stretching across Africa, Spain, and beyond. Its harbors overflowed with silver ivory grain and purple dyes, prized across ancient civilizations. Yet wealth rarely protects empires from fear, especially fear written across the heavens. You climb narrow temple steps overlooking the harbor, while priests whisper urgently beside carved altars, blackened by centuries of smoke. The smell surrounding them is thick and bitter. Myrrh, burning cedar, hot oil from flickering lamps. One elderly priest lifts his eyes toward the reddening moon and quietly recites older prophecies warning of blood in the sky before blood on the earth. No one interrupts him, because Rome waits across the sea. Historians know Carthage and Rome existed in escalating conflict for generations during the Punic Wars, competing fiercely for dominance across the Mediterranean. Military losses, political strain, and economic pressure created deep anxiety inside Carthaginian society. And anxious societies interpret omens intensely. The eclipse overhead feels impossible to ignore. Ancient Mediterranean cultures commonly feared lunar eclipses, associating them with divine anger, political collapse, or military disaster. Blood-red moons particularly terrified populations already living under wartime pressure. The heavens appeared wounded. That image alone could destabilize confidence. You move toward the edge of the temple terrace, while the city below glows dim amber beneath torchlight. Carthage remains beautiful from above. Grand villas overlook the sea. Markets wind through elegant streets. Warships rest within carefully engineered harbors, guarded by towering walls. Yet beneath the beauty, dread moves quietly tonight. A messenger arrives breathless from the western gates, carrying reports of Roman troop movements. Several priests exchange grim glances immediately. The eclipse now feels personal. One younger attendant accidentally drops a ceremonial bowl, sending bronze clattering loudly across the stone floor. The sound startles everyone nearby. Tiny accidents feel enormous during fearful nights. The chief priest orders additional sacrifices prepared before dawn, while scribes record the eclipse's exact progression carefully onto wax tablets. Every detail matters. Timing, color, position. Nothing is random here. Historians still debate how deeply ordinary Carthaginian citizens believed in celestial omens compared to political elites or priestly classes. Much surviving information about Carthage comes through Roman sources, which complicates interpretation significantly. The victors preserved most of the records, and victors rarely describe enemies fairly. Still, power surrounding eclipses appears nearly universal across ancient societies. You glance upward again. The moon now glows fully crimson above the harbor. Dark clouds drift slowly beneath it, while waves slap softly against stone docks far below. Somewhere beyond the city walls, horses whinny nervously inside military stables. War presses closer every month. One fringe account, preserved through later Roman writings, claimed certain Carthaginian priests believed eclipses revealed moments when protective gods temporarily turned their gaze away from humanity. Beautiful idea. Terrifying implication. Whether the belief genuinely existed remains uncertain. Yet standing beneath this blood-colored sky, it becomes easy to understand why such stories survived. The temple drums begin sounding softly now from lower courtyards. Slow, rhythmic pulses echo upward through the warm night air, while citizens gather nervously near shrines and public squares, seeking reassurance from rituals older than memory. Rituals matter deeply during uncertainty. Even symbolic comfort feels valuable. You descend briefly into the lower streets where merchants quietly cover market stalls, while families move indoors earlier than usual. A woman drawing water from a public fountain pauses repeatedly to stare upward at the eclipse between nervous prayers. Children ask questions. Adults struggle to answer calmly. Will Rome attack soon? Are the gods angry? Can moons bleed forever? No one replies confidently. Ancient Carthage depended heavily upon maritime trade and military strength. Roman victories threatened not only political independence, but the entire economic structure supporting the city's wealth and stability. Fear of invasion grows slowly at first. Then, all at once, you continue toward the military harbor, where massive warships rest beneath flickering lanterns. Bronze rams protrude from their hulls like sharpened teeth, while exhausted sailors sleep uneasily along the docks. Some remain awake watching the sky. One veteran quietly mutters that eclipses appeared before earlier defeats too. Memory sharpens superstition. Historians know ancient commanders occasionally delayed battles or altered plans based upon eclipses and other celestial phenomena. Even disciplined armies became psychologically vulnerable beneath unusual skies. Confidence matters enormously in war, and confidence collapses easily beneath cosmic fear. The harbor smells strongly of tar saltwater fish and wet rope now. Wind ripples dark waves against stone embankments, while the eclipse slowly begins fading at last. Silver light gradually returns to the moon's edge. But relief does not follow immediately, because omens linger psychologically long after disappearing physically. You pause beside the outer seawall overlooking the Mediterranean, stretching black and endless beneath the night. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Roman ships move steadily through the darkness, toward future battles not yet fought, toward Carthage itself. One elderly sailor nearby quietly recalls an older prophecy, claiming the city would someday burn so completely that future generations would doubt it ever existed at all. Strange prediction. Historically uncomfortable, because centuries later, Rome would indeed destroy Carthage with devastating finality after the Third Punic War. The city would burn, its power would vanish, and legends about curses, omens, and blood moons would grow stronger afterward. Perhaps humans always reshape memories around catastrophe. The eclipse fades further now, while temple bells ring softly across the awakening city. Citizens slowly emerge from shrines and courtyards, speaking more quietly than before. The crimson glow disappears completely from the moon, yet the uneasy feeling remains. Above ancient Carthage, the sky resumes its ordinary beauty, while the city itself drifts closer toward history's edge beneath silent stars and the distant shadow of Rome. Section 13. The sacred fire burns low beneath the stars of ancient India. You sit beside a riverside temple, while warm night air carries the scent of sandalwood smoke and jasmine drifting across dark water. Crickets sing steadily among banyan trees, whose enormous roots twist into the earth like sleeping serpents. Above the temple courtyard, thousands of stars shimmer across the sky with impossible clarity. The priests speak softly tonight, because they are discussing the Kali Yuga, the final age, the age of darkness. You watch flickering firelight dance across carved stone pillars covered with faded images of gods, celestial wheels, and cosmic battles. Nearby, a wandering ascetic, wrapped in saffron robes, recites verses older than kingdoms themselves, while listeners sit silently around him. No one interrupts. These prophecies feel too heavy for an interruption. Ancient Hindu traditions describe time not as a straight line, but as immense repeating cycles, called yugas. Each cycle moves gradually from harmony toward corruption, before destruction and renewal begin again. And according to many interpretations, humanity already lives in the last and darkest age. The Kali Yuga, an era marked by greed, violence, dishonesty, and spiritual decay. Comforting idea? Not exactly. Historians know concepts surrounding cyclical ages developed gradually across centuries within Hindu philosophy and sacred literature. Texts like the Mahabharata and various Puranas describe moral decline unfolding over enormous cosmic timescales. Yet scholars still debate how literally ancient communities interpreted these ages historically versus symbolically. The ambiguity remains part of the tradition itself. You move closer toward the fire, while sparks rise lazily into the humid night air. The old ascetic's voice remains calm and hypnotic as he describes signs of the Dark Age approaching completion. Kings become thieves. Truth loses value. Families fracture. Violence spreads without purpose. Simple warnings, disturbingly timeless. The listeners around the fire shift uneasily, despite the warm evening. One merchant quietly touches prayer beads hidden beneath his shawl. Another lowers his gaze toward the river beside the temple. Prophecies become most unsettling when they feel familiar. A cool breeze ripples across the water, while temple bells ring softly somewhere farther downstream. The sacred river reflects moonlight like flowing silver beneath drifting mist. Beautiful scene. Uneasy atmosphere. One lesser-known tradition claims certain sages believed cosmic disorder during the Kali Yuga would eventually affect nature itself. Rivers would dry unexpectedly. Seasons would behave strangely. Harvests would fail despite careful preparation. Historians caution against reading modern environmental anxieties directly into ancient texts. Still, ecological instability has frightened humans for thousands of years. That fear never ages. You wander beneath the temple arches, while priests prepare small offerings beside bronze statues darkened by centuries of smoke and touch. Oil lamps flicker gently in the warm darkness, while chants echo softly through the stone corridors. Everything here feels ancient, patient, as though civilizations rise and collapse routinely while the temple simply watches. The ascetic continues describing later stages of the Dark Age now. Rulers exploit the weak openly. Wealth replaces wisdom as society's highest virtue. Sacred teachings survive only in fragments while false teachers multiply everywhere. Several listeners nod quietly. Too quietly. Historians often note that apocalyptic or decline narratives frequently emerge during periods of rapid political and social change. Ancient India experienced repeated transformations through warfare, migration, economic shifts, and evolving religious traditions. People living through instability naturally search for larger meaning. Prophecy offers structure to uncertainty. You sit beside a carved stone railing overlooking the riverbank below. Pilgrims continue arriving even this late at night, carrying flowers, candles, and bowls of clarified butter for offerings. Faith survives remarkably well during fearful times. Perhaps it even strengthens. One younger priest nearby quietly mentions recent famines affecting distant regions north of the river valleys. Another references increasing violence between rival kingdoms. Ordinary historical problems, perhaps. Yet tonight, everything feels connected to the prophecy. That is the strange power of cosmic decline stories. They absorb every crisis into themselves. A fringe interpretation from later medieval traditions suggested certain celestial alignments would signal the final collapse of the Kali Yuga before divine renewal begins. Specific stars, eclipses, or planetary conjunctions supposedly carried enormous prophetic importance. Modern scholars debate these interpretations heavily. Many likely developed much later than the earliest texts themselves. Still, frightened people always watch the sky carefully. The fire crackles softly, while smoke drifts upward beneath the banyan branches overhead. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls through the darkness before falling silent again. The ascetic's voice lowers almost to a whisper now. He describes humanity eventually forgetting compassion entirely. Sacred rivers become polluted. Leaders manipulate truth freely. People lose connection with both nature and one another. The listeners remain motionless, because the prophecy no longer feels distant. Ancient Indian philosophy often treated cosmic cycles with remarkable emotional complexity. The Kali Yuga was frightening, yes, but also temporary, within an endless pattern of destruction and renewal. Darkness never remained permanent. Neither did glory. That cyclical perspective feels strangely calming compared to purely catastrophic prophecies. Even endings eventually become beginnings again. You notice temple attendants replacing dying oil lamps carefully one by one along the courtyard edges. Their movements feel deliberate and soothing against the growing stillness of the night. Light preserved against darkness. Simple ritual. Powerful symbol. One elderly woman seated near the river suddenly asks whether humanity can shorten the Dark Age through righteous action. The ascetic smiles faintly before answering. Individual goodness still matters, he says, even when larger cycles continue unfolding. Especially then. The response softens the atmosphere slightly around the fire. Not completely, but enough. Historians still argue whether ancient cyclical age theories reflected pessimism or realism regarding human societies. Perhaps civilizations always sense their own fragility eventually. Perhaps decline becomes easier to imagine once enough generations witness repeated conflict and collapse. Or perhaps humans simply fear losing meaning itself. The river wind cools slightly now, while stars wheel silently above the temple complex. Somewhere beyond the trees, distant thunder rolls across the horizon, though the sky remains clear overhead. You glance upward. The constellations appear eternal from here. Yet every civilization beneath them once believed its own struggles carried cosmic importance too. The fire burns lower. The chants soften. Around you, worshippers begin settling into quiet meditation beside the riverbank, while priests continue tending lamps beneath the ancient stone arches. And somewhere within the endless cycles described beneath tonight's stars, humanity continues adrifting through ages of light and darkness, forever wondering whether the prophecies describe the future, or simply ourselves. Section 14. The forest remembers older gods than Rome. You walk beneath towering oak trees while cold mist drifts silently between ancient trunks covered in moss. Wet leaves soften your footsteps along the narrow woodland path. Somewhere far away, ravens call through the gray dawn, while unseen streams murmur beneath tangled roots. The deeper you travel, the quieter the world becomes. No cities, no temples of marble, only forest. And somewhere ahead, the Druids are waiting. Ancient Celtic societies spread across vast regions of Europe long before Roman conquest reached many of their lands. Their sacred spaces often existed not inside massive stone buildings, but within forests, rivers, hills, and hidden groves, where nature itself carried spiritual power. And according to whispered traditions, some druids could foresee disaster before it arrived. You continue through the fog, while damp air chills your skin beneath heavy wool clothing. The forest smells rich and earthy, rain-soaked bark, cold soil, wood smoke drifting faintly from somewhere unseen ahead. At last you notice them. Several figures stand silently beside a clearing, encircled by enormous standing stones, darkened by age and moisture. Their pale robes move gently in the wind, while torches hiss softly beneath the mist. No one greets you immediately. The silence feels deliberate. One elderly druid finally steps forward carrying a branch of sacred mistletoe, wrapped carefully in linen cords. His long silver hair hangs loose around weathered shoulders, while faint blue markings cover his hands. His eyes seem exhausted, as though he has already seen too much. The druids gather tonight because troubling signs have appeared across the land. Birds migrating unusually early, rivers flooding during dry months, strange lights reported above distant hills, and worse still, Roman armies continue advancing northward. Historians know much of what survives regarding druids comes through Roman writers, whose descriptions remain deeply biased and incomplete. Julius Caesar portrayed druids as influential religious authorities involved with ritual law education and prophecy. Yet scholars still debate how accurate many Roman accounts truly were. The druids themselves left very little written record behind, which makes them feel even more mysterious now. The old druid motions toward the standing stones, while several younger attendants begin placing bowls of herbs and burning branches around the clearing. Smoke curls slowly upward into the fog. The smell grows thick and bitter. Juniper, pine resin, wet moss beneath rain. You sit quietly near the edge of the ritual circle, while dawn struggles weakly behind heavy clouds overhead. Somewhere nearby, a deer crashes suddenly through undergrowth before vanishing into the trees. Even the animals seem nervous today. The druid begins speaking softly in a language older than Rome itself. His voice blends strangely with the wind moving through the forest canopy above. He describes visions received during recent nights, cities burning beside foreign banners, sacred groves cut down, kings kneeling before distant emperors. The listeners remain motionless, because many already suspect these prophecies may soon come true. One fringe tradition preserved through medieval folklore claimed certain druids interpreted the movements of birds, storms, and tree growth patterns as prophetic signs connected to approaching political upheaval. Modern historians remain skeptical about how systematic such practices actually were. Still, ancient cultures everywhere searched nature for warnings. Humans rarely stop doing that. You glance upward through the branches overhead, where ravens circle against the pale morning sky. Their dark shapes disappear repeatedly into drifting mist before emerging again. Beautiful birds, unsettling symbols. In Celtic mythology, ravens often carried associations with war fate and divine messages. Their appearance during rituals likely intensified emotional tension within already fearful communities. The forest itself feels watchful now, ancient, patient. The younger druids begin striking small bronze bells softly, while the elder continues describing his visions. Roman roads spreading endlessly through tribal lands, local rulers betraying one another for survival. Sacred traditions fading generation by generation. Not sudden destruction. Slower, perhaps more frightening because of that. Historians note many Celtic societies faced enormous pressure during Roman expansion across Europe. Military conquest brought cultural transformation, political restructuring, and religious suppression alongside trade and urbanization. Worlds rarely disappear overnight. They erode gradually first. You notice one young warrior listening near the outer stones, gripping his spear tighter during parts of the prophecy. Another lowers his gaze entirely when Rome is mentioned directly. Fear changes posture immediately. The elder druid now approaches the center stone, where rainwater has gathered inside shallow carved symbols, worn smooth by centuries. He touches the surface carefully before speaking again. "The forest survives longer than kingdoms," he whispers. Simple sentence. Heavy sadness. A cold wind suddenly sweeps through the clearing hard enough to extinguish several torches at once. Smoke twists violently through the mist, while nearby horses whinny nervously from deeper within the woods. Nobody speaks for several moments afterward. Ancient rituals often gained emotional force through natural coincidence. Sudden storms, animal cries, or shifting winds could feel like direct responses from unseen powers during ceremonies already charged with expectation. Meaning forms quickly inside fearful minds. Perhaps necessarily. You wander briefly beyond the ritual circle, while the druids continue chanting behind you. The forest stretches endlessly in every direction beneath the fog-hiding rivers. Villages, burial mounds, and pathways known only to local tribes. Places Rome has not reached yet. Places Rome eventually will. One lesser-known medieval story claims a druid once predicted that although foreign empires would dominate Celtic lands temporarily, fragments of the old traditions would survive hidden within songs, folklore, and rural customs long afterward. Historians cannot verify the story's origins clearly, yet the prediction proved strangely accurate. Cultures rarely vanish completely. They linger quietly. The rain begins falling softly now through the branches overhead. Droplets strike leaves with gentle rhythmic sounds, while mist thickens across the clearing. The druids continue their ritual. Despite the weather, their pale figures barely visible between drifting smoke and rain. The atmosphere feels dreamlike, half prophecy, half memory. You return toward the standing stones as the elder druid finishes the final portion of the ceremony. He warns that violence cannot prevent every loss. Some changes arrive regardless of resistance. The listeners absorb this silently, perhaps because they already know. Far away beyond the forest, Rome continues expanding steadily across the ancient world, beneath disciplined armies and imperial ambition. Roads spread, languages shift, sacred places disappear beneath stone and law. But here inside the mist-covered grove, older fears still breathe softly beneath the trees. Fear of forgetting, fear of fading, fear that one day the forest itself may remember more than the people living beside it. The bells fall silent now. Only rain remains, and somewhere beneath the ancient oaks of the Celtic world, prophecy lingers quietly among roots deeper than empires or than Ma. Section 15. The prophecy refuses to die. You stand alone beside the ruins of an ancient road, while twilight settles softly across the landscape. Wind moves through broken stone arches, overtaken by ivy and wild grass. Somewhere beyond the hills, church bells echo faintly through the evening air, while crows gather along crumbling walls, darkened by rain and centuries. Empires have fallen here before, many of them. Yet the old fears remain strangely alive. You walk slowly along the abandoned road, beneath a sky fading from pale gold into deep blue. The air smells cool and damp now. Wet earth. Smoke from distant chimneys. Ancient stone after rain. Scattered ruins surround you in every direction. Roman foundations beneath medieval towers. Forgotten shrines buried beneath newer temples. Layers of civilization resting uneasily atop one another, like dreams refusing to disappear completely. And hidden inside every layer, the same warning appears again. The end is approaching. Every civilization seems to invent its own version eventually. You continue uphill toward the remains of an old fortress overlooking valleys, wrapped in gathering mist. Along the path, weathered carvings depict kings sleeping beneath mountains, warriors waiting beneath lakes, and forgotten rulers promised to return during humanity's darkest hour. The stories change. The fear underneath them does not. Historians know apocalyptic prophecies appear repeatedly across cultures and eras, especially during periods of instability, invasion plague, or political collapse. Human societies naturally imagine endings when their worlds begin feeling fragile. And fragile worlds are common throughout history. One legend whispers that King Arthur still sleeps beneath Britain's hills, waiting to rise when the land needs him most. Another claims Emperor Frederick Barbarossa rests inside a mountain cavern, while ravens circle overhead, counting down toward the world's final crisis. Elsewhere, ancient prophecies speak of hidden kings, sleeping armies, or forgotten saviors destined to awaken at civilization's edge. Comforting idea. Also, deeply unsettling, because such legends quietly assume catastrophe will eventually arrive first. You reach the fortress ruins just as darkness settles fully across the valley below. Broken towers loom against the night sky, while cold wind whistles softly through empty windows and collapsed hallways. The place feels abandoned, but not entirely empty. Memories linger strongly, where enough fear once gathered. You step inside a roofless stone chamber, where moss covers cracked floors beneath moonlight. Someone long ago carved faded symbols into the walls, beside older inscriptions almost erased by time. Different languages, same anxiety. One inscription warns that stars shall fade before the final winter. Another predicts cities without mercy and rulers without wisdom. Disturbingly familiar themes. Historians still debate why end-of-world prophecies recur so consistently across unrelated cultures. Some researchers argue apocalyptic thinking helps societies process uncertainty and mortality psychologically. Others suggest humans simply struggle imagining permanent stability. Perhaps both explanations intertwine naturally. The wind strengthens outside now, while clouds drift across the moon overhead. Shadows move slowly through the ruined fortress as branches scrape softly against broken stone. You remember Delphi, Babylon, Jerusalem. Every civilization believed somehow that its fears mattered cosmically, and perhaps they did. One lesser-known medieval tradition claimed certain wandering monks collected fragments of older pagan prophecies, preserving them secretly inside monasteries, alongside religious texts. Historians question how much truth survives within such stories. Still, prophecy travels remarkably well across generations. Fear is highly portable. You descend a narrow stairway beneath the fortress into colder underground chambers, where damp air smells of mildew, rainwater, and ancient dust. Your footsteps echo softly against stone walls, disappearing into darkness below. At the bottom waits a sealed iron door. Rust covers most of its surface now, though faint carvings remain visible beneath torchlight. A sleeping king beneath stars, a sword, a circle broken into pieces, symbols layered upon symbols. No clear explanation survives. One fringe theory among folklorists suggests sleeping king myths became especially popular during times when conquered populations longed desperately for restoration and justice. Future saviors offered emotional survival during difficult eras. Not prediction exactly. Hope disguised as prophecy. Yet hope and fear often resemble each other closely in ancient stories. You rest beside the cold wall, while distant thunder rolls softly across the hills above. Rain begins tapping gently against the ruined fortress overhead. Slow rhythm, comforting rhythm. The strange thing about ancient prophecies is not whether they proved accurate, Most remained vague enough to fit many outcomes eventually. The stranger reality is how consistently humans continue creating them. Again and again and again, modern people still predict collapse constantly. Economic collapse, environmental collapse, social collapse, technological catastrophe. Different language perhaps, but emotionally familiar. The ancient fears never vanished. They evolved. One surviving medieval manuscript described a prophecy claiming humanity would someday possess endless knowledge, yet feel more spiritually lost than ever before. Historians caution against forcing modern interpretations onto symbolic texts. Still, certain old warnings feel uncomfortably adaptable. The rain outside intensifies now, while water drips steadily through cracks in the ruined ceiling above you. Tiny streams spread across worn stone floors where countless frightened people once stood, listening to stories about endings still waiting beyond the horizon. Perhaps every generation secretly believes it stands near history's edge, because mortality itself feels apocalyptic personally. You rise slowly and climb back toward the surface ruins, while storm clouds move heavily across the moonlit valley. The world outside appears softer now beneath the rain, quieter, almost sleepy. Far below, scattered village lights flicker warmly through the darkness. Ordinary people continue eating dinner, tending fires, comforting children, and preparing for tomorrow, exactly as countless generations have done beneath ominous skies and ancient warnings. Life persists stubbornly. That may be humanity's oldest tradition. You pause beside the fortress wall one final time, while cold wind brushes gently across the hills. Somewhere nearby, ravens settle silently among the ruined stones. The prophecies remain behind you now, yet not entirely, because pieces of them still linger everywhere. Inside old stories, inside fears passed quietly between generations, inside the uneasy feeling that civilizations, no matter how powerful, always stand closer to collapse than they prefer admitting. Above the darkened ruins, clouds slowly part at last, revealing endless stars, turning silently through the night sky. The same stars watched by Babylonian astronomers, by Norse seers, by Mayan priests and Roman prophets. Civilizations vanish, the sky remains. And somewhere deep inside humanity's oldest nightmares, the whisper continues softly across centuries. The end may always be closer than it seems.